Hi everyone, before I begin, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. I promise you, the story I'm about to share is something you will not forget. It's real, it's raw, and it's my life. Thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. My name is Margaret Linsley. I'm 65 years old, and I have lived through a life filled with joy, sorrow, and lessons that have shaped who I am today. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and secrets are hard to keep. I always considered myself a trusting person, perhaps too trusting, but that was part of my charm, or so I thought. I never imagined that someone I considered my closest friend could harbor intentions that were completely the opposite of friendship. That someone could smile at me with warmth while secretly plotting to take everything I had. And yet, here I am, recounting the day I discovered the betrayal that would change my life forever. It all started with a woman named Clara Winslow. Clara and I met when I was 42, at a community art class. I was painting a landscape, trying to capture the soft golden light of the late afternoon, and she complimented my work. Her smile was bright, and she seemed genuinely interested in my life. She told me she had recently moved to the area, was looking for friends, and shared some stories about her own struggles. At first, I thought she was lonely like me, and I welcomed her presence. I never suspected that behind her laughter, behind her friendly chatter, lay a mind filled with envy and greed. We began spending more time together. Coffee dates turned into lunch dates, and eventually, we were inseparable. I confided in her about my life, my small but successful art business, and even personal matters I hadn't shared with anyone else. I told her about my late husband, how I had managed the gallery on my own, and how I dreamed of traveling the world once I retired. Clara listened intently, always nodding, always encouraging me. I trusted her implicitly, but something began to feel slightly off after a few years. I noticed subtle comments that didn't sit right. Remarks about my artwork, like, "Oh, anyone could paint something like this," or hints about my savings, casually said over tea. At first, I dismissed these thoughts, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, she had been my friend for so long, and friends sometimes joke in ways that feel awkward. But there were moments when her eyes lingered on my things a little too long, or when she asked questions that seemed too pointed, too curious. The real turning point came one chilly autumn afternoon. I had invited Clara over to see a new series of paintings I was working on. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the canvases. We sipped on tea, and I noticed her gaze drift toward my desk, where a small stack of checks and some important documents were kept. I didn't think much of it at the time. Later that evening, I received a strange call from my bank. Someone had inquired about setting up access to my accounts. My heart sank. I knew immediately that Clara had been probing for information. I felt betrayed, angry, and foolish all at once. How could I have been so blind? How could someone I had welcomed into my home, shared my dreams with, and trusted completely, plan to take advantage of me in this way? I decided to confront her, but I didn't want to do it impulsively. I needed evidence, proof that she was scheming behind my back. I began paying closer attention to her actions, watching for signs, and documenting every unusual question and behavior. It was hard because, outwardly, she was always charming, always seemingly caring. She was the type of person who could smile while hiding her intentions, so well that anyone else would doubt their own suspicions. One evening, I invited Clara over for dinner. I prepared her favorite meal, set the table with my finest china, and made sure everything was perfect. She arrived, radiant as ever, chatting about her day and laughing at my silly jokes. I offered her a drink and casually mentioned that I was expecting some important documents in the mail. She perked up and asked if she could help with anything, pretending to be concerned. I smiled, masking my true intentions. That night, I had already set a little trap, just enough to confirm my suspicions without revealing that I knew. It took a few days, but the results were undeniable. Clara had tried to access information about my finances, subtly probing neighbors and acquaintances, pretending it was casual conversation. She had even suggested joint investments, carefully phrasing her questions to learn as much as possible without raising alarms. My blood boiled when I realized the depth of her greed and deceit. The person I had trusted the most, the one I had called my friend, had been plotting to take everything I had worked for. I will never forget the moment I decided that I would not be a victim. I sat in my art studio, surrounded by the paintings that were my life, and I made a promise to myself. Clara had underestimated me. She thought that because of my age, because of my gentle nature, I would be easy to manipulate. She was wrong. I began to plan my own course of action. But unlike Clara, I didn't want revenge that was cruel or vindictive for the sake of satisfaction. I wanted justice, I wanted exposure, and I wanted to reclaim the control she tried to steal from me. I started by gathering proof, emails, texts, and recordings of her conversations where she tried to manipulate others into providing information about me. I reached out to friends and colleagues, careful to keep my plan discreet. It was during one of these meetings that I realized something important. Clara had underestimated not just me, but everyone around her. She assumed people would believe her lies, assume I was being paranoid, and give her access. She didn't count on loyalty, observation, or the quiet intelligence that comes from years of life experience. And as I looked at the evidence I had collected, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. The confrontation itself was carefully orchestrated. I invited Clara to the gallery under the guise of discussing a potential partnership. I had set up cameras and ensured that anyone who entered the gallery could observe without being noticed. When she arrived, she was her usual self, smiling, chatty, pretending everything was normal. I greeted her warmly, offered her tea, and engaged in small talk. Then I guided her toward the topic I knew she had been secretly eager to discuss, my finances and future plans. I watched her closely, noting every flicker of interest in her eyes, every subtle question she tried to disguise as innocent curiosity. And then, I revealed the evidence, carefully, calmly, and with precision. Emails printed out, notes from neighbors, and even a transcript of her own words that showed her intentions clearly. Her smile faltered, her posture stiffened, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. "Margaret, I can explain," she stammered, but I shook my head. There was no explanation that could undo the trust she had broken, the betrayal she had orchestrated over months and years. I stayed calm, and I let the evidence speak for itself. The moment she realized that her plan had been completely uncovered and that I was in control, was a moment of profound satisfaction, not out of malice, but out of justice served. That evening marked the end of our so-called friendship. Clara left the gallery with a forced smile, knowing that the game was over. I, on the other hand, felt a sense of liberation. I had not only protected myself and my life's work, but I had also demonstrated to myself that age, experience, and careful observation are powerful tools. I had turned a potentially devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment. And so, here I am, sharing this story with you. Not because I want anyone to feel sorry for me, but because I want to remind everyone that trust is precious, and betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. But with awareness, courage, and a clear mind, you can protect yourself and reclaim control. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is simply exposing the truth and walking away with your dignity intact. I want you to imagine the feeling of realizing someone you trusted is plotting against you. The shock, the heartbreak, the anger, but also the strength that rises when you take control. That is what happened to me. That is what it feels like to turn betrayal into empowerment. As I promised, the story continues. After that evening, when Clara had left my gallery with her carefully forced smile, I felt a sense of relief that was almost dizzying. But life, as it often does, didn't allow me much time to simply bask in my victory. There were consequences to the exposure, small ripples that spread far wider than I could have imagined. People in my community started to talk. Some were shocked, some were sympathetic, and some were curious to know the full story. I decided to remain quiet publicly, letting the truth speak for itself. Yet privately, I knew I had to be careful. Clara's reach and her charm were not to be underestimated. In the following weeks, I returned to my daily life, running the gallery, meeting clients, painting in the quiet of the mornings, and enjoying the comfort of routines I had long cherished. But the betrayal had left a mark, a subtle shadow over my once unquestioning trust. Every new person I met, every friendly smile, now carried a hint of suspicion in the back of my mind. It was a strange feeling to be aware of how human deceit could be so smoothly masked, and yet I refused to let it dominate me. Clara, however, didn't simply vanish. She tried subtly to reinsert herself into social gatherings, community events, and even gallery openings. I observed her from a distance, noting the forced warmth in her interactions, the careful modulation of her voice to appear innocent, to appear as if nothing had happened. But her eyes betrayed her. I could see the calculation, the continued desire for influence and control, even if she had failed in her immediate plan. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message. It was from a local journalist, someone I barely knew, asking for a comment about a rumor circulating about Clara Winslow and the so-called friendship scandal. At first, I ignored it. My instinct was to avoid unnecessary publicity. But as I considered it, I realized this could be an opportunity. Not for revenge, not for humiliation, but for clarity, for setting the record straight in a controlled manner. I agreed to a brief interview, careful to maintain my dignity and truthfulness. During the interview, I recounted a portion of what had transpired, careful to avoid slander but firm in my statements about trust, betrayal, and the importance of vigilance. The journalist was attentive, and I could see that my words carried weight. I realized that while Clara had attempted to manipulate reality, her actions had opened a door for me to share my story with others, perhaps even helping someone else avoid a similar fate. And then, something unexpected happened. People began reaching out to me. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had faced similar betrayals. They shared their experiences, expressing gratitude for my courage in exposing deceit. This was when I truly understood that my story was no longer just mine. It had become a testament to resilience, an example of empowerment. And in that realization, I found a new sense of purpose. But Clara wasn't done. I could feel it. Her subtle maneuvers continued, though now more cautious. There were moments when she would attend gallery exhibitions just to gauge my reactions, lingering near paintings she knew were significant to me, hoping I would show signs of unease. I played my part, remaining composed, observing, and letting her underestimate me once more. I learned something crucial through this. Patience is a powerful ally, and watching someone unravel from their own miscalculations can be more satisfying than any immediate confrontation. I began to document everything again, noting patterns in her behavior, recording interactions when necessary, and analyzing her methods. I had become a quiet observer, turning my pain and betrayal into a strategic awareness. I started referring to this as the art of vigilance. It was no longer simply about revenge. It was about protecting oneself, anticipating danger, and maintaining control over one's life. During this period, I also started mentoring a few young artists at the gallery. I wanted to instill in them not only technical skill but also an understanding of the importance of trust and discernment. The world of art, I explained, was full of beauty, but it could also attract envy and greed. I shared some lessons carefully, without revealing the full depth of Clara's betrayal, but enough to convey the necessity of caution and self-respect. Watching them grow, seeing their confidence blossom, brought me a sense of healing I hadn't anticipated. There was one particular evening that stands out vividly in my memory. I was preparing for a private exhibition, one that would showcase a series of landscapes reflecting the changes of seasons, my favorite theme. Clara had somehow heard about it, and she attended under the pretense of interest in the artwork. I welcomed her with a polite smile, offered her tea, and engaged in casual conversation. Inside, however, I was acutely aware of her every move. She asked about a specific painting, the one I had completed just the week before, a serene depiction of a misty forest at dawn. Her tone was casual, yet I could see her eyes scanning for details beyond the art itself. I noticed her glance toward my studio, toward my personal workspace where private sketches and notes were kept. I felt a flicker of irritation, quickly tempered by the knowledge that I had secured all sensitive materials. I allowed her questions to linger, carefully controlled, and then smoothly transitioned the conversation back to the art itself, highlighting technical aspects and inspiration. Clara's frustration was almost palpable. She realized that her usual tactics, subtle probing, manipulative charm, were no longer effective. I had taken control, and she was aware of it, though she could not openly admit it. The satisfaction of this realization was profound, but I knew better than to celebrate openly. The lesson was clear: composure and observation often speak louder than confrontation. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's presence in my life gradually diminished. She continued to make occasional appearances, but her influence waned. People had seen through her charm, and her manipulations no longer had the power they once might have. I found myself reflecting often on the nature of human relationships, the delicate balance between trust and caution, the way intentions can hide behind smiles, and the power of standing firm in one's truth. And through it all, I began to heal, not just from the betrayal itself, but from the fear and uncertainty that had accompanied it. I realized that betrayal, while painful, can also illuminate one's own strength. I had confronted deceit, observed it unfold, and emerged not only unscathed but empowered. There is a remarkable clarity that comes from facing adversity head-on. I continued my art, creating pieces that were infused with emotion and resilience. Landscapes that captured not only the beauty of nature, but also the quiet strength of someone who had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Patrons of the gallery often remarked on the depth and emotion in my work, unaware that the inspiration stemmed from a personal journey of betrayal and triumph. During this time, I also took steps to ensure my personal life was secure. Finances were reviewed, important documents were safeguarded, and routines were adjusted to minimize unnecessary exposure. It was not paranoia. It was prudence born from experience. I had learned the hard way that good intentions are not always enough, and that protecting oneself is an essential part of living fully. One evening, as I sat in my studio, reflecting on the past year, I realized something powerful. Clara had taught me more than she could have imagined. Her betrayal, while deeply hurtful, had forced me to recognize my own strength, my own resilience, and the importance of vigilance. I had transformed what could have been a story of loss into a story of empowerment, and I knew that this message could resonate with others. And so I decided to share my story, not for revenge, not for drama, but for awareness. To show that even at 65, even after facing deceit and betrayal, one can reclaim control, protect what is valuable, and emerge stronger than before. There is dignity in exposure, in careful observation, and in choosing one's battles wisely. Before I continue to this story, I want to remind you again. Please like this video if you're enjoying the journey, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know, and it allows me to share stories that might help others navigate the complexities of trust, friendship, and human nature. As the months passed after Clara's diminished attempts to insert herself into my life, I began to feel a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since the initial shock of betrayal. But peace didn't mean complacency. I had learned that vigilance was not a one-time effort. It was a lifelong practice, an understanding that the world is filled with both kindness and cunning, often intertwined. Then, one crisp winter afternoon, an unexpected opportunity presented itself, one that would finally allow me to bring closure to the chapter of my life dominated by Clara Winslow. A prominent gallery in the city, one I had admired from afar for years, reached out to me, inviting me to exhibit a series of my work. This was no ordinary invitation. It was a chance to share my art with a broader audience, to gain recognition that went beyond my small town. I accepted immediately, knowing that this was my moment to step fully into the next phase of my life. As preparations for the exhibition began, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Every stroke of the brush, every late night spent in solitude, every carefully preserved document of evidence against Clara, all of it had led to this point. I had transformed pain into empowerment, betrayal into clarity, and suspicion into wisdom. And now I had the opportunity to celebrate life, to embrace creativity without fear, and to continue my story on my own terms. Clara, of course, heard about the exhibition. I had no doubt she would attempt to attend, perhaps to observe, perhaps to feel a fleeting sense of control once more. But this time, I was fully prepared. I arranged for private viewing hours for select guests, ensured security was aware of potential disruptions, and created an environment where my focus remained on the art and the joy it brought. I would not allow fear or past experiences to dictate my present. The opening night arrived, and the gallery was buzzing with anticipation. Patrons, critics, and fellow artists moved among the exhibits, discussing the intricate landscapes, the emotional depth, and the vivid colors that seemed to capture not just scenes of nature, but the essence of resilience itself. And then, as expected, Clara appeared. She entered quietly, dressed in muted tones, attempting to blend in, to avoid drawing attention to herself. I noticed her almost immediately, but I did not let it disrupt my focus. Instead, I observed calmly, aware that the tables had irrevocably turned. Clara approached one of the paintings that had been particularly challenging for me, a depiction of a stormy coastline at dusk. The waves were turbulent, the sky heavy with clouds, and yet there was a sense of peace in the way the light broke through, illuminating the horizon. I had poured months of emotion into that piece, capturing both struggle and hope. Clara studied it intently, her usual confident composure faltering slightly. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the woman she had attempted to deceive was not only unbroken but thriving, stronger than she could have ever anticipated. I approached her slowly, offering a polite nod and a measured smile. "Clara," I said softly, my voice calm, "I'm glad you could make it." She returned the nod, her smile thin and controlled. "Margaret," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. There was an awkwardness, a tension in the air that spoke volumes. She knew that her attempts to manipulate me had failed, that her schemes were transparent, and that I held the undeniable proof of her intentions. Yet she tried, as always, to mask it with a veneer of civility. I guided her through the gallery, discussing the technique and inspiration behind each piece. She asked questions, attempting to appear genuinely interested, but I could see through the facade. Her curiosity was no longer innocent. It was calculated, yet constrained. She understood that her influence had ended. My life, my gallery, and my reputation were secure. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of absolute authority over my world. The night progressed, and guests began to leave, praising the collection and offering congratulations. I received warm, sincere compliments that were untainted by ulterior motives, affirming that my work and my character stood firm. Clara lingered near the exit, her eyes catching mine briefly. I gave her a simple nod, acknowledging her presence without granting her the satisfaction of engagement beyond what was necessary. She left quietly, the weight of defeat heavy in her steps. After she departed, I stood in the gallery, looking around at the paintings that had been my companions through joy, sorrow, and struggle. A wave of gratitude washed over me, not just for the art itself, but for the lessons learned along the way. Betrayal, while painful, had taught me discernment, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from standing firm in one's truth. I realized that empowerment often comes not from retaliation, but from recognition. The recognition of one's own value, the understanding of human nature, and the deliberate choice to act with integrity. In the days that followed, Clara made no further attempts to interfere with my life. Word of her failed manipulations had spread subtly, not through gossip or malice, but through the undeniable outcomes she had left behind. She had been exposed, and the community had quietly taken note. My life returned to a rhythm that was both comforting and invigorating. I painted, I mentored, and I allowed myself the luxury of enjoying friendships that were genuine, carefully nurtured, and fully reciprocated. One morning, while sipping tea in my sunlit kitchen, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal, the meticulous observation, the strategic documentation, and the ultimate exposure had all been transformative. I had learned to trust my instincts, to observe carefully, and to act decisively. I had discovered a capacity for resilience and strength that I had previously underestimated in myself. And most importantly, I had reclaimed the narrative of my life. I was no longer a passive participant. I was the author, the guardian, and the curator of my own destiny. There is a unique power in witnessing someone who underestimated you realize their miscalculations, and then choosing not to exploit that moment for vengeance, but for clarity and dignity. That, I realized, was the true essence of justice. Clara's downfall was not my triumph over her. It was the natural consequence of her actions when faced with transparency, awareness, and unwavering composure. In the months that followed, I focused on expanding the gallery, bringing in new artists, and hosting workshops that emphasize both skill and ethical engagement in the art world. I encouraged young artists to trust their instincts, to value authenticity, and to cultivate discernment in their relationships, both professional and personal. Each session was infused with the wisdom I had gained, subtly teaching lessons from my own experiences without revealing all the painful details. I also took time for personal reflection and growth. I traveled to places I had dreamed of for years, capturing landscapes on canvas and in photographs, exploring cultures, and reconnecting with the beauty of life beyond the confines of fear and mistrust. Every journey reinforced the lesson that empowerment is not merely reactive, it is proactive. It is about cultivating awareness, protecting what is valuable, and embracing life fully, even in the aftermath of deception. Then, one evening, as I prepared for a small, intimate exhibition of travel-inspired artwork, I received a letter from Clara. Her handwriting was careful, precise, almost timid. Inside, she offered a brief apology, not for her actions, not for the harm caused, but for any perceived tension. I read it, considered it, and placed it aside. I felt no anger, no desire for confrontation. Instead, I felt closure. Her apology, while incomplete, was irrelevant to my peace. I had already reclaimed my narrative, and that was more powerful than any acknowledgement she could offer. Standing in my gallery that evening, surrounded by paintings that told my story in colors and light, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Betrayal had been a catalyst, but it did not define me. My response, my courage, and my integrity had shaped the outcome. I had transformed adversity into a testament of resilience, a narrative that would inspire not only myself but also those around me. And so, Margaret Linsley, 65 years old, reflected on her journey, a journey marked by trust, betrayal, vigilance, and ultimately empowerment. I had faced someone who sought to manipulate and deceive, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. I had learned that true strength lies in awareness, careful action, and the refusal to allow someone else's greed to dictate the course of your life. Before I conclude this story, I want to thank you for listening, for being present, and for understanding that real-life betrayal is complicated, painful, and often transformative. If you've enjoyed this journey with me, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows stories like mine to be shared, and perhaps it can help someone else recognize their own strength in the face of adversity. In the end, life is a canvas. Betrayal and deceit are but dark shades, temporary shadows against the brighter colors of resilience, love, and personal integrity. I chose to paint my life with courage, patience, and awareness. And now, when I look back at that chapter with Clara Winslow, I do so with clarity, knowing that I did not allow bitterness or anger to dominate me. Instead, I allowed wisdom, dignity, and empowerment to guide my actions. The story concludes not with revenge in its traditional sense, but with a quiet triumph. The triumph of integrity over deception, of awareness over manipulation, and of resilience over betrayal. And in that, there is beauty, satisfaction, and peace. As I continue my life, painting, mentoring, and exploring the world, I carry the lessons with me. To trust carefully, to observe keenly, to act decisively, and to always honor my own values and strength. Clara's presence, once a source of anxiety, is now simply a reminder of the resilience I discovered within myself. And that, perhaps, is the most rewarding revenge of all, not to harm, but to thrive fully, despite the attempts of others to undermine you.